Alright guys, welcome back. GM Light here. Today we're going to be ranking all 10 Saw movies now that we have Saw X. We could finally get into it, talk about which one's the worst, which ones are the best. So let's get into it. Now at the bottom of the list, number 10, it's Saw 5. This hasn't changed since the last time that I've ranked these movies. It's always been my least favorite. I just find this movie to be significantly more underwhelming than a lot of the other ones. I don't find the main game to be anything really special. There's some entertainment value in there, and there always will be with these Saw traps, these Saw games, but it's just not special at all. And then the main plot I find very boring. It's just a lot of detective stuff. Strom kind of catching up to the plot that we already know. It doesn't feel like it provides anything new or fresh to the series. It really is the point where the movies felt the most complacent, with just kind of being on this treadmill of Saw movies where they just keep going, deliver the same thing over and over again. It's when the stories get very episodic, and this movie just feels like nothing special. So it's at the bottom at number 10. Number 9 is going to be Saw 4. And although I feel like I'm a little bit more positive on this movie than the last time I watched it, I feel very mixed about it, and I have a lot of problems with it. I think that the message just totally gets lost in this movie, and as the first movie without Jigsaw, it really feels like it struggles to kind of justify its own existence. What we do continuing from here without Jigsaw, and since they also killed Amanda, who could have served as a good legacy to this franchise, it feels like it's really on the struggle bus to figure out what's going on, how to continue this series and make it still compelling and interesting. They do some good stuff here. I don't want to say there's nothing good. They introduce some new elements, but I just don't overall like the message that this movie sends. It feels a little bit unnecessarily cruel, especially because of what they do with Eric Matthews, where it just felt completely unnecessary to bring his character back just to do this with him. So for that, Saw 4 is going to be at number 9. Now at number 8, Saw 7, the final chapter. I think that there's a significant gap between Saw 4 and 5 in this movie for me. I do like this one a good bit. I just have some nitpicks with it, primarily the fact that this is just a terrible finale movie. As a finale, it doesn't work at all. But as a Saw movie, it provides a lot of the good stuff that I really like. I really like what Kevin Grudert provides to this series as a director. I think that the Saw traps, the plotline of a guy who faked being in a trap, that stuff works for me. I really like that stuff, but it just does not do any favors as finale. It doesn't do anything for Hoffman, nothing interesting with Jill Tuck. The Gordon stuff feels completely shoehorned in and forced. It makes sense that he would be an apprentice, but really the only setup that we get is one scene earlier in the movie, in the therapy scene where he's kind of creepy, and then it becomes very obvious from there that he's going to be the apprentice. So there's very limited setup and delivery to that premise itself. And not only that, but I don't know why this is something that they would introduce at the end of the last movie. If it's not going anywhere, why would you keep these loose ends unexplained, completely open? It just feels like a very weird thing to do with a final movie. You would think that they would close up all these apprentice storylines, wrap things up in a way that's satisfying, but this movie doesn't really do that, and that's kind of my main problems with it. But overall, still very entertaining. I still like the main game, and there is still a lot to enjoy about this movie. But unfortunately, for the problems I have with it, it's gonna have to stick at number 8. With number 7, Jigsaw 2017. So this movie kind of has the problem of, it was the big return for this franchise all these years later, but it kind of just felt like more of the same. But in some ways though, that is a good thing, because it does feel like it fits nicely in with the rest of the franchise. Tonally, aesthetically, it kind of just fits right back in, but it does have a little bit higher production value. It feels more theatrical, and they treat Jigsaw's return to the big screen with a lot of weight and gravity, which I appreciate when they do reveal him. But I think that it does just stumbles into some of these issues of uninteresting police investigations and some of the stuff that kind of bogs down some of the other movies. But overall, the main game, the barn, all that stuff's entertaining. Jigsaw's return is, I'm never going to complain about Tobin Bell as Jigsaw. He's always incredible. Some of the characters aren't particularly interesting, and I don't like the idea of another apprentice out there that we never knew about, and I assume they wanted him to carry on this franchise, but of course that's never going to happen. So now we just have another unresolved Jigsaw apprentice that we're never going to see followed up on. But other than that, very entertaining Saw movie, and just another good entry in this franchise. Now on to the 6th movie, and before I say this, I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for this ranking, but the original Saw is my number 6. And despite what you think, I really love this movie. This isn't an indictment on the movie's quality, because I know it's probably objectively the best one, and it's very good. Great plot line, especially with what they do with this budget. Overall, I love this movie, and I love all the rest of the movies, and I have a lot of love for the previous movies that I did list. But with this one, I think what makes me put it lower is that it doesn't have some of those elements of the Saw franchise that I really came to enjoy and expect from this franchise in its better entries. Jigsaw isn't really as much of a factor in this movie. He's kind of kept obscured in the shadows. You don't have those plot lines. The traps feel a little bit less intense or as exciting as they kind of get to be in some of the sequels for me. The main game is interesting, but it's just some of this movie is a little bit more tame than I like the Saw movies to be. The story's very good. There's a lot that's great about it, but it just doesn't have exactly what I'm looking for when I come to these movies. Although it is intense, it definitely feels like there's a lot more breathing room in this movie than there is on some of the higher movies on this list. You don't feel as much anxiousness or the threat of a time clock as much as you kind of do in some of the other movies in the series. It's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more meticulous, and some of that's great, especially because the script is punched out really well, but it just isn't my favorite. It's just not exactly what I come to this franchise for, so I kind of just have to put it at number 6. So now for number 5, this is also the placement that I get a lot of shit for putting this movie so high, but Spiral from the Book of Saw. I think this movie is woefully underrated. I really enjoy this movie. I'm a huge fan of what Chris Rock does with this premise and with this franchise, and I'm really let down that this movie wasn't better received or critically more celebrated, because I really enjoy his character. I really enjoy his dichotomy with this version of Jigsaw, and I also love the idea of someone completely irrelevant to Jigsaw, separated kind of from the continuity and all the pull of the original movies, doing his own Saw game and applying the Book of Saw to this broken, corrupt police system that's going on in the city. That stuff is very interesting to me. The performances are very good. There's just a level of claim that's kind of brought to this movie. Chris Rock's funny when he needs to be. He's very serious and good when he needs to be. And although I don't think that the twist is the most effective just because it's so obvious, I really like the last 2 minutes of the movie. I think just end the movie on a very dark, dour note that hits home, makes you feel for Chris Rock's character, and it makes you just want a sequel where he catches up with this version of Jigsaw and brings him to justice. I wish that there was some kind of follow-up. I love the idea of there being a protagonist and an antagonist that run through a Saw franchise, where you have most of the movie actually be about this investigation and kind of forming a rivalry between these two. I'm a big defender of it. I know a lot of people aren't, but I love Spiral, and that's why I'm putting it at number 5. Now for number 4, the new movie, Saw X. And I actually think that this has the potential to move up. I just feel a little bit weird about putting it higher because of recency bias. I kind of feel a little bit weird about putting a movie that I just saw above these other movies that I've been watching for all these years and I love. So this is probably the spot that I feel the most comfortable putting it, at least for now, until I spend more time rewatching it, get more time with it, because I am very excited to rewatch it and see how it holds up, how rewatchable it is. But I could tell you, I think it's going to be very rewatchable. I think it's going to become a staple of my Halloween season. And what I really love about it is that you get a whole ass movie about Jigsaw, and not just Jigsaw, but John Kramer. You get a character movie. Something that this series is desperately needed is a whole movie where Jigsaw's the main star, and basically the whole movie you're following him. It's just something that they've been sorely missing, something that I'm really happy that they did with this version of the Saw movies. It also kind of, interestingly enough, gives him a villain. Like I mentioned with Spiral, I like the idea of there being a protagonist and an antagonist in this series that runs through a couple of different movies. I just never would have thought that what would turn out to be, and in a way, without spoiling anything, you kind of get that antithesis to Jigsaw in this movie. You finally get a character that kind of challenges Jigsaw in certain ways, even kind of turns the tables on him, and it makes for a great Saw movie. Putting this character as the focus is a very good idea. It's something that I hope they stick with going forward, and it's what made this movie, I think, so successful and resonate with so many people, and not just Saw fans. This movie is resonating with general audiences. People are really enjoying it. It even has an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's fucking insane. Who would have thought Saw 10 would have an 86% critics rating, 90% audience rating? That's wild. So for that reason, Saw X is number 4, but it has the potential to move up. Now at number 3, Saw 6. After how bad Saw 5 is, I think this movie does a really good job about just taking things back to what's best about Saw. And it focuses on what's great about this franchise. You get a classic trap in the beginning of the movie, and they put the main focus on the game, while also making the Hoffman stuff interesting. Some of it felt a little boring in Saw 5 because it kind of is just Strom figuring out shit that we already know. And that could have worked, but they don't do it in an interesting way in that movie. In this movie, you have the cat and mouse game of the police with Hoffman. He's being chased by them, he's being found out by them, and it adds a level of tension to that, which is pretty great. And then the main game is absolutely brutal. My only problems really with it are the fact that people are used as externalities in these games, and they really have no say in their survival, unfortunately. It feels kind of cruel, a little bit against Jigsaw's ideology, but because they do it so well, and because it makes for more intense traps like the carousel one, I'm definitely willing to forgive it. It also adds some social commentary to kind of elevate it even a little bit. I'd also say that Saw 6 is probably one of the easiest ones to just rewatch and get into. This is the one that I probably pop in maybe the most. I just find it to be a good solid package of what I want to see in a Saw movie that's easy to watch, and whenever I'm in the mood, this is probably going to be the one that I throw in. So Saw 6 is number 3. But now for number 2, Saw 2. What I love about Saw 2 is that you get so many different things that come to be staples of the franchise, and those staples are the things that I grow to love in this franchise. You finally get to spend time with Jigsaw, uncover his ideology a little bit, see how his brain works, and then you also have the cleverness of this main game. I like the idea of bringing Amanda back and then having that incredible reveal at the end, which is probably the best twist of the whole series. This movie fires on all cylinders. It's a compact, tight 90-minute movie. It's intense. It has that added level of intensity and urgency with the deadly nerve agent that makes them need to work at figure this out, how to get cures. There are a lot of iconic scenes, moments in this movie, like the needle pit. The girl gets her hands trapped in the box trying to get the cure. And before Saw X, this is probably the most we got to see of Jigsaw as an active part of the movie in real time. This is the first, and until Saw X, really the only time where you see him in real time and he's not dying, and then you can actually pick his brain a little bit, see his emotional manipulation, why he's so effective as a character. It's very interesting, makes for a great Saw movie, and makes for just an overall better sequel that improves on everything that the first movie did and expands the mythology to really make this be a franchise. But for number 1, peak Saw, Saw 3. Man, I really love this movie. Picks up right where things kind of left off, and it just starts to make this series feel more like a cohesive saga. There's some of the highest amount of intensity in this movie that there ever will be. And the main game is probably the most memorable and emotionally effective because you feel for this guy, Jeff, so much. I know a lot of people get annoyed with him because he doesn't make decisions fast enough, because he's hesitant. Sometimes people don't fuck with the character. But I think that putting him in this position and seeing as these aren't just random people, I understand why he would have this reservation. He spent these years resentful and angry towards these people that contributed to the death of his son and the lack of justice that came from that. And then now that he's provided with this opportunity to get retribution, he has a hard time deciding whether the fates that they're being given are too cruel or if they're just desserts, and that's what he wants them to endure. This movie also provides a pretty satisfying end to Jigsaw's story in a way that just feels very in line with the character that they established in the previous 2 movies and the character that continues in this movie. It's also pretty upsetting to see Amanda's unraveling, kind of the breakdown of that relationship and the fact that she ultimately fails. All this to say that it wraps up the trilogy really nicely. It makes for a good solid first 3 Saw movies, and the impact of the ending is just so catastrophic that it takes a couple movies to really recover from this one. An excellent Saw movie, excellent movie featuring Jigsaw with his full character ending. That's why Saw 3 is number 1. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what your Saw rankings are in the comments. Am I right? Am I wrong? I'd love to hear. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.